Okay. So hello everyone. Good afternoon. I almost said morning. And welcome to our first ever webinar. We'll be keen to get some feedback on this at the end. Please feel free to use the chat function and also the Q&A function that you'll see on your screen to interact with us throughout. We will get to everything at the end and hopefully answer all of your questions towards the end of the webinar. But just very quickly, Elaine, if you want to bring up the next page. Okay, so why are we here? First of all, I'm Pamela Hazlet and I'm the sales manager at School Property Matters. Some of you will know my face. We've had the pleasure of a face-to-face meet or a virtual meeting. Other people might just know my voice, but I speak to multi-academy trusts, single academy trusts, local authorities and schools every single day. And for me, that's a real privilege. I get to hear all of the things that you're excited about, all of the things that you may be a little bit unsure of or concerned about. And I would suggest that the DfE's Net Capacity Assessment Programme, more commonly known as NCAP, sits somewhere in between. So as much as I adore having our conversations and hearing all about what's happening for you at your trust, at your school, at your local authority, I found that certainly over the last few months, there are serious similarities between the questions that you're asking about the NCAP programme and what this nationally run exercise is all about and how it impacts you. And so our response to that has been, let's do a webinar. Let's get everyone together in one space and open up the floor to questions. We are the UK's leading net capacity consultants. We're the only company who specialise in this area, as many of you will know. And we do have some answers to some of the questions that's been asked. So on our panel today, you have me, Jeremy Pilgrim. Many of you, again, will know Jeremy's our Managing Director. And rather than put to you some of the questions that come across our desk every day, we felt it would be perhaps more useful for you to hear what the concerns and excitement is that's coming out of a trust. And so very kindly, Ian Dickinson, who is the National Head of Operations at Academies Enterprise Trust, agreed to be interviewed by Jeremy. But I think when the tape rolls, you will see that that very quickly switched round and it's more Ian interviewing Jeremy. And there's some really interesting takeaways from this interview. It is quite lengthy. I will not take up any more of your time and I think we'll get cracking on the video. And please do use the chat function at the bottom, use the Q&A function, because when the video finishes, Jeremy and I are staying on and we will be able to take your questions. And equally, Ian is happy if you have any queries for us to pass those on. So without any more hesitation, I think we'll play the video.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Pilgrim. I'm the Managing Director of School Property Matters. I've been working with schools since 1996 now, about 4,000 schools across the country, where we've drawn CAD plans, full building information models, and calculated the pupil capacity. Our real specialism is figuring out how many children you can fit into a school. And Ian, welcome.
Hi, I'm Ian Dickinson. I'm National Head of Operations for the Academies Enterprise Trust, primarily looking after the estate. But in doing that, obviously need to know what the capacity of the buildings is and whether we need to be thinking about expansion or in fact contraction these days, trying to save energy. So Jeremy, I had an email from a head teacher the other day.
Yep.
It was a weird one because it went to the contact us email address, which was very strange. And it had a letter enclosed saying that the DfE had appointed the VOA to carry out net capacity assessments at the school. Now, obviously, the head teacher knew nothing about it. I know nothing about it. So hence the call. What's all this about?
Okay, well, the DfE have decided that they wish to collect data on the pupil capacity of secondary and special schools across the country. That they have talked about this for many years. It's been known as an issue. It used to be local authorities that collected this data 20 years ago, and they now want to try and create a central source of this data. in my view, a little bit late. That I think they've spent not far off £20 billion accommodating extra pupils across the school system in the last 10 years. So this data would have been great 10 years ago, but I applaud it.
The local authorities still do collect data though, don't they? They still do send sort of a very brief 2-page document about the capacity of the school.
The local authority have a requirement for submitting SCAP data and school census data, and there's a bit of a mismatch in the system between the local authorities and the academies. The academies bill had no provision for passing of pupil place information backwards and forwards between the school and the local authority. So the school supplied the places, the local authority managed the demand for places as the commissioner of school places, and there was a mismatch between the two. There was no legal requirement for data to be passed backwards and forwards, and who was responsible for it. So they report it, but a lot of times it's reported from the data they hold, which may be out of date, or in some cases even based on the funding, rather than the funding agreement, rather than on actual knowledge of what goes on in the school.
Okay. So this to me, this is just out of the blue. It's not been particularly announced anywhere, or not that I've seen it. Normally, if there's a building or education related matter, we automatically get bulletins and notification about bulletins from the DfE. But I've heard nothing, and neither has anybody in the trust.
That seems to be quite common, but slightly surprising. And I know there's been a lot of information about it, but I also know there's a lot of information about lots of things coming out of the department to yourselves. And I wonder if the message has been buried in the general communication and information that they send to you across the year. But they are adamant. They've made a lot of effort to contact everybody and make everybody very aware of it. I've known a bit for a while, but I guess I would do. It's our specialist subject. So yeah, I think there's some confusion as to who is to be notified. And you say that the communication went to a general contact email address at the school. When you read the documentation online, it states clearly that it will be head teachers and estates managers, trust estates managers who will be notified. And clearly that's not the case in your position, or the communication has been buried amongst other communication and just been lost.
We've had a number of them now come through, and one has actually gone to a head that left 3 years ago. Right. So that doesn't help. I am fortunate in that since we had our initial talk about this, I've managed to register my name on the portal to make sure that I do get copies of these emails now when they come out. So at least I'm beginning to find out that they are occurring. But initially, it's a problem if people don't see them. A contact email address is generally general inquiries about the school or the academy, isn't it? It's not something that's there for.
It's the last place I'd expect something of this nature to go to. I think one of the things that we will do when we put this webinar out is we will put the contact details for DfE for the Net Capacity Programme in there, and the documentation about it, the link to that, so that everybody knows where it is and where to go to find out about it. There is a document online that describes everything. There is a tranche list that tells you when your school's likely to be done. It's quite a broad list in terms of the time, but it gives you an idea of when your school will be done. And that information is publicly available now.
Right. Okay. So I could be very skeptical about the whole process, in that why just the secondary schools and special schools and not primaries? And I suppose my cynical mind says, well, there isn't a problem with primaries at the moment because the bulge years have gone past, but there's certainly an issue with secondaries and special schools. So is this a means by which we're trying to justify or attempt to justify not increasing expenditure on providing proper spaces for those schools? What's your thought?
That's very cynical thought there.
It was.
It's, yeah, I think on that basis, it's too late for the secondaries. The bulge is year 9, year 10, and the space is now either there or ready to be there next year in the secondary schools. The bulge is on its way to sixth form and colleges. So if it was in response to the population bulge, it would be targeted, I think, at FE rather than secondary. So I don't know. I mean, primary, I think, is an easier thing to work out. Secondary is a much more complex problem, and they want more data on that. But I'm not sure. I think the data will work great from a central perspective, and the net capacity assessment is great as a tool to look broadly across schools and areas to see if there is pupil capacity in those areas. But it's not any good as a real tool at local level to work out in a secondary what you need to do to accommodate more pupils. It just isn't. It's not a tool for that. It's more for somebody planning pupil places in an area. And I wonder where this piece of information will fit going forward. Will the DfE, if you are talking about having an expansion in an area that's got a population boom locally, will the local authority turn now to this document and demand that there's space in the school and therefore you can accommodate the pupils? Or is it just another piece of information in a complex negotiation between the local authorities and the schools and the multi-academy trusts now?
I don't know. And certainly we've got this pressure in Birmingham at the moment.
Right.
And of course the issue currently is Birmingham, technically bankrupt, so there's no money.
Yep.
So I don't know what's going to happen there, but there's certainly pressure coming from the Birmingham area.
Yep.
So how has the valuation office agency got involved, and what are their qualifications to be able to do such a task?
They are knowledgeable on buildings in terms of they have a team that go out to buildings across the country. I think it's the rateable values they set, isn't it? I think.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Yes.
So then they've got experience of that, and they've somehow over the last 18 months it went from a public procurement of a contract to government appointing its own people. And I guess if I was sat there with my own team, I'd be looking at them first rather than paying somebody else to do it. Did they have spare capacity, spare time? I don't know. They definitely had no knowledge of schools really in terms of the detail of school operation. I think there's a team of people there, and they say they can do it. They did it once before, a long time ago. Sadly, I'm old enough to remember. And yeah, they were the people who won the contract in the end to do the work. But I think it's yet to be seen. We're seeing now a lot of initial data coming through that we're checking. Are they able to do it? Well, they're getting around the schools. They're doing the process. I'm not sure I'd do it exactly how they're doing it, but who am I to say? Their process must be working to time and a budget. So hopefully it'll come out well.
Well, I hope it's not another CDC escapade. I was only thinking earlier about you. Earlier today, I had a net zero accelerator meeting.
All right.
And they wanted to refer to the CDC2 data. And I thought, well, that's interesting because we had a CDC2 inspection in March of this year of Hockley Primary School. which said everything was absolutely fine, the roof was perfect and everything else. And then in June, the DfE shut it down because of RAC and the risk associated with it, which just shows how little use those are. They refer to a model and having a model where they input their data. Do you know anything about this? I mean, is it going to allow them to be a little bit more consistent across the 30 VOA offices around the country?
Good question. I've been communicating with the team procuring this and managing it from DfE's perspective for some time now. One of the original things they were planning to do was to externally procure software to control and manage this. I think the Valuations Office Agency have come forward with the software to manage this. There is very little, in fact, no information you get on what that actually is, how they're actually doing it. I know the data that we've seen working with you coming back on the initial checks. They've taken well-structured CAD plans, reduced them down to A4 prints and scribbled on them, and then translated that information later on into spreadsheets. So that doesn't look like a highly controlled app environment. I don't know for certain. They ran a pilot on this over a period of time, actually using the CDC process. Initially, they ran a test to see how they could do this, and the outcome of that, one of the things was that there were 8 different methodologies used, but they wouldn't release data about any of them. One of which I know was 3D scanning of the building, but they didn't release any data to say what the outcomes were, other than that they were very pleased with the nature of the output, which great. But the ones that we saw, we've had to challenge a couple that have come through where we just disagree with them when we've done more detail on the capacity. But is it likely that we will always find that when we're working to a high level anyway? We're doing a lot more detail on the actual operation of the school, but some of the things that we challenged are just basic allocation of spaces and the use of the space.
But this is more akin to the way we do a primary school rather than a secondary school.
Yeah, it's just getting the basics that you've got.
They're not taking into account, for instance, the timetable of the school as we would do in a secondary school.
No. So that's the net capacity assessment does not take any curriculum modelling timetable into account. It doesn't work with the schedule of accommodation tool for the building bulletin 103. But I'm assured, when I went to a presentation on this last year, I was assured that the data will match the ADS codes used in the schedule of accommodation, so you could feed it back into there. But that isn't evident in the information that we've seen so far, because we haven't seen any final output yet.
Okay. So we haven't really touched on special schools. To the best of my knowledge, there's no prescribed sizes and accommodation schedules for special schools. So how on earth are they going to come up with something that fits special schools into that secondary school formula, for want of a better word?
They say they have, and we've seen a couple of early betas of this. So it's definitely on the way. It was in the presentation that I saw earlier this year. Special schools are a tricky one. We've been doing capacity reports on special schools for over 10 years now. I think we're probably the only people that actually will take on an existing special school and reverse engineer what the capacity of that school is, but it is a very difficult thing to do. The nature of the requirements of the pupils can change the capacity. If you've got a need for physical support, then suddenly when you add more pupils with that requirement, the capacity of the school drops as a result of the cohort that's come in that year. And it can equally change term by term if that child leaves, moves on to another school, or parents move. So it's a very difficult thing to work with.
Yes. Well, we've got 5 special schools in the trust, and they all have different space requirements. There's no consistency whatsoever.
Yeah.
Because of the different pupils that are in there. So I'm fascinated to know how that's going to work. And interestingly enough, which is useful in many respects, we have received notification about them wanting to visit one special school so far. And they're wanting to visit when the school is closed.
Right.
Which is okay in one respect, because it doesn't cause any disruption to the children, and the children could react to unknown visitors to the site.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, they can't see how it's working. It's just an empty space. So they can't take into account the behavioural issues that are associated with those children.
We've had 2 examples in the last couple of months with special schools and the new net capacity calculation methodology, one of which suggested there was a lot of extra space within the school, which the school just didn't believe, and our previous reports and work in the school would dispute. And the other suggested that the school had a capacity that was about half of the current number of pupils that they had in there. And their question was, what do we do? Are we opening ourselves up to a health and safety issue by continuing to operate with this number of pupils when there is now a government document that says we should have half this number of pupils? So they wrote to the local authority and asked the question.
Wow.
And in both cases, in one case, the local authority said, yes, trust this document, we can squeeze more children in. And in the other case, they said, no, ignore this document, it's just a guideline, and you don't need to halve your pupil numbers. So I can't really give you a definitive answer. It's one more piece of information in a general environment where it's a negotiation. I'm sure you know yourself that the rule of thumb for how many children you can fit in a special school is the local authority keep stuffing them in there until the school squeals, and when the school squeals, it's full. That's been the methodology, and we tried for years with our calculations on this to put some science and a number against that, so that there is a number that you can work to and say this has been calculated by reverse engineering the design standard to actually give you a number. But like I say, the results that have come out on specials so far are wildly differing, and the answers as to what you do with that data are again wildly different. So I don't know. I think it's yet to be seen what will happen with that.
I don't think we'd expect a local authority to react too positively to the news that there are too many students in a special school, because they'd have an immediate problem.
Yeah, yeah. Where are you going to put them?
Yes.
Yeah.
One of the things that they're asking for initially with the first email is CAD drawings, and have any other previous net capacity assessments been done, and can they have copies of each of these? What happens if you don't have them? What will they do?
Well, that's a difficult one, because in your case, across all 57 of your schools, we've done net capacity assessments, we've drawn CAD drawings,
yes,
of all. Yet the first example we had, they'd taken a print of the CAD drawing, so ignored the basis of the fact you had a real world scale CAD drawing there that you could measure from. There was an Excel room schedule of all of the rooms with all of the areas and the usages to quite a level of detail that is perfect for net capacity. And all of the net capacity information was actually in that spreadsheet as well. And they used none of it. So it's what I would have thought, giving them the information, my advice to anybody in your position would be, give them everything you've got, anything that could possibly help, because that's your information that you've already procured and you're working with and you're confident with. And if you're giving them that, they're starting from the same point you are.
Mm.
So
what about the people, the schools that don't have CAD drawings? What happens then?
Well, there's various approaches. You won't find anything detailed written down other than that the Valuations Office agency will procure a plan if there is nothing else available. But they are planning to be quite resourceful in where they look to collect plans, to try and find plans from fire layout drawings, from the fire zone drawings, anything they can find that shows a layout of the school, and they can then add their measurements to, they will. But like I say, even when they've been presented with data that has all of the measurements on it, they've measured again themselves. So some of your room areas, generally, they're all in the same sort of region of being similar. When you look at them, the proportions are all similar, but some of them are out by 2 to 3 square meters, which is 1 to 2 workplaces in a general teaching classroom. So, but their overall results, they're confident they're plus or minus 1% on where they should be. So it could just be that at a very local level, there might be small issues, but this is a national thing to get a national picture of have we got enough pupil places for all the children in the system.
Okay, all right. On the initial email again, there's the comment made that they will spend some time on the site, and it refers to a day or so. I haven't come across anything that's less than 3 days yet.
How many people went to site?
2.
Yeah, so 6-man days.
Yeah. And they say they'll come and visit, and then they'll go away and update their models and produce a report, a draft report for you to look at. Then send it back, during which time we've got 14 days to either check or disagree with the data. Now, and it also goes on to say that, you know, if a failure to respond will mean that you agree. So it's not something that you've got an infinite amount of time with. How do we deal with that? I know you've kindly checking our data for us, but how does everybody deal with that? What's the best way around it?
It's a difficult one, and for me to answer, give you a simple answer, because in your position, we've done CAD and detailed pupil capacity across all your schools. At present, we are not planning to charge you to do these checks on their data, but we've done 4,000 schools across the country. If all 4,000 dump their net capacity data in front of us and ask us to check it, and we're not charging for it, it causes a problem. So going forward, I'm unsure on what that position will be. But in terms of from yourselves, your point of view, yes, they've given you 2 weeks to check that data. And this is, I think, your only opportunity to change the room usage or dispute anything in there. So have they got all of your blocks? Because it's one thing checking what's there, but seeing what's not there could be another problem. So there was an off-site area that quite often there's an off-site playing field that might have changing rooms and 2 classrooms on the top of it that are used for teaching PE, that type of situation. And those things are the ones that you might miss when just looking at a room list. So it's checking it is quite difficult. And I think the ones we've checked for you, they're not bad, but there's some things in there that would make a difference to the pupil capacity of the school that were wrong. And therefore,
I think there was one area that they classed as teaching space, which actually wasn't. And I think it was about another 28 or 30 pupils different.
Yes. So and I think, I'm not sure if they're being cheeky or clever by putting that onto you to do that check, or saying, look, you're complicit in this calculation. You've had an opportunity to check and you agreed, or agreed by default by not giving them any comments on it. But you have agreed. There will be another opportunity at the end when the calculation has been completed on the net capacity form. You will be presented with the data to say, look, this is the outcome of it. But I don't think that's please check it again and pass it back to us. I think that's you've got a couple of weeks to shout before it's published type thing. And you'd have to say at that point, yeah, there is some issues with it. And at that point, again, I would expect you to be passing yours to us again to have a quick look at and say yes or no. That nobody has that output yet because they haven't finalised the spreadsheet yet. It's for over 12 months. The spreadsheet has been 2 weeks away, and it was, as of yesterday, a couple of weeks away before Christmas, though. So that's interesting. For the secondary schools net capacity spreadsheet, I believe it's the new year for the special schools version of that.
Oh, there is, as you know, there is a schedule of tranches. We mentioned it earlier. Now, it goes from September this year, isn't it, when it's first started, right through to mid-2025, I believe.
Yes.
To get all the secondary and special schools in. They are booking these up now 2 months in advance. So we've seen already in December bookings made for January and February, which is nice in a sense that we can see it. But what happens if school fails to reply to them? You know, if they don't pick the email up and they fail to reply?
I think I saw somewhere in the documentation that 11% of the pilot schools didn't engage with the process. Now, 11% of these secondary schools is quite a large number.
Right.
It's 350, 400 schools that are not engaging with the process, and I can't see that being acceptable. I'll be honest, I don't know the answer to that. I think they're going to make a lot of effort to try and collect that data, but that will be within reason. And whether they have a mop-up process at the end to try and catch those that didn't manage to get the first time round, I don't know. And it's quite probable that that's going to be the case if you missed all the documentation on it and the schools hadn't brought it to your notice and they'd had a lot of documentation on it. Yeah, somehow going to be missed.
What would you say then to you know the school who turned around and said, well, do we need to engage in this? Is this important?
I would say yes. I've been advocating for years that we should have more of a focus on people place planning, and all local authorities produce their pupil place planning document that details the demand for pupil places across the country. So every area has one, every region with every area has one, and it's all very detailed information. The other side to that equation is the supply, that we've got a demand for places. There's 9,070,000 children in the school system as of a couple of months ago, and they all need a pupil place somewhere, and the supply side of that is how many pupils the schools can accommodate. And therefore, centrally, we should have that information. Centrally, we know to the one pupil how many pupils are in the system currently. And that information is published constantly, and it pops up on my LinkedIn feed constantly, because every time it comes up, I publish information on there so that people can just see the outline number. Because I'm a little bit surprised that the number's still going up, and I haven't quite figured out why yet. But I thought the population,
probably a migration.
Yeah, it could be. It could be. I thought the population was shrinking, and because of the bulge having gone through the system and on the far end of its process through the system. So I've forgotten where you started from with the question, Ian, on this. That it's should they engage, wasn't it? That and I think they should. This information is needed centrally. We need it as a country. It's part of the. We know where the pupils are. Now we need to know where their school places are, so that somebody can sit down and match the two and make sure we've got the right number of places for everyone across the country, and not just in total, but in the right place as well.
But is it likely to affect, the funding agreements of schools, or?
I don't think so. I can't see how it can, because the funding agreement has a number of places in it, doesn't it? And you're funded against that number of places.
Yes, but if it's found out that you haven't got that space.
That would be a different argument, wouldn't it? That not having been involved in those discussions, I don't know the answer to that. That'll be an interesting one. But the CDC argument was always that once we know the overall backlog maintenance requirement for all of the schools in all of the country, the Department for Education can argue with the Treasury for more money because there is a number we're arguing for. And here, it costs money to provide every pupil place in every building. We haven't got enough, and I think there's a legal requirement to have about 2% surplus in the system, that if we haven't got enough, then the funding needs to be there to provide enough. Or if it's in the wrong place for where the population is, then the funding needs to be provided for that. So it could result in more money in the system, or a better argument for the department to take to the Treasury to get more money in the system. But is there any more money in the system to give? I don't know.
Okay. One last question then, Jeremy, from me. I mean, you've seen some of these results that have come through from the valuation office, because I know people have shared them with you. What's the worst? The worst.
Happy that, Ian. I can't be on record to release that information.
You don't have to say that. I'm not interested in who it was, but how far has the worst one been out?
We've been involved with a school where there are many pieces of data being put forward between the trust, the school, and the local authority, and the variation between the number of pupils that school can accommodate is 600 pupils. It's
600 difference.
600 difference, yes. Somebody needs to crack heads together and get a one definitive piece of information through that. But unfortunately, the net capacity is not that definitive piece of information. The net capacity is a theoretical capacity of the school, not an objective understanding of the operation of the school and how the space is used at a local level and what's required. So if they teach their core maths and English subjects in groups of 27, the minute you go below 30 on the net capacity, it doesn't work. So as soon as you go to 27, you need one extra room, regardless of whether you go down to 29, you need one extra room, because if there's 4 sets, there's 4 pupils that don't fit in those 4 rooms, and they need a room to go in. And it doesn't matter that the only rooms that are available are 56 square meters. You need one more room. And that's the reality of the timetable, and fitting the timetable and the curriculum into a school, which is completely different to the net capacity, which is your theoretical, what could this building accommodate in an ideal world?
Very good, thank you.
So a couple of questions for you.
Yeah, by the way.
Long before I started working with you and providing you with lots of capacity data, you already had, I remember, a spreadsheet of all of your pupil capacity. You had a little dashboard of your red, amber, green on this, of how you looked at capacity. How do you use pupil capacity, and where have you fitted the net capacity in to your operations and your strategic planning?
In a number of ways. So I look at it on the basis of what I need within a school. Generally, is there going to be a problem coming up? We've also started looking at that data to say, do we have too many classrooms in the school, and should we be looking at cutting them down? And again, this was being discussed on the Net Zero Accelerator discussions this morning, because it's a simple way of reducing carbon emissions, not heating and not using specific rooms. So it's used that. But we also do a lot of modelling within AET on pupil numbers across year groups, and we're starting to use that information now for that purpose. Looking at classrooms that are available, spaces that are available, what can be used for what across a particular school. We also use a lot of it for toilets and spacing in dining halls, and also in sports halls. So it's used quite a lot for different things by different people. It's not just me.
So what's your thoughts on one more piece of data coming into this equation of the net capacity held by central government?
I'm as skeptical about this as I am about the CDC data collections,
Right.
Which again, these aren't my words, but they're often referred to as drive-by surveys. I was in one school when that information was collected, which is part of the rebuild program, the priority rebuild program. It was surveyed by 2 surveyors in 40 minutes, and they said that the floor slab was perfectly acceptable. There was nothing wrong with the walls, and there was nothing wrong with the roof, and yet it's subsiding all over the place. So I'm as skeptical about this process as I am about the CDC data.
Right. And interestingly, I would draw the parallel for people looking at the net capacity programme to CDC in terms of it's a piece of information being collected from a central perspective for central use. It's not for general operational use at the school level and at trust level, really. It's if you want that information, you need to procure your own to the level of detail that you require as a trust, and they treat it the same way, really, that it's another piece of information. It's interesting that going back 12 years ago to before the property data collection, the forerunner to CDC, that before then, very few academies did their own condition surveys, and very few academy trusts did their own. I think AET actually did at the time, I seem to remember, but very few academy trusts did condition surveys across the board. Once the government started collecting their own data, it highlighted the importance of it and made people think about it. And suddenly you have this position today where it's unusual for a single academy school to not have a condition survey, and certainly for a multi-academy trust not to have condition surveys. So I think the net capacity assessment programme might drive the same type of thing. Everybody will start to wonder, what is this for and why is it there? And should we have our own data?
Well, I know when we look at spacing, it's a broad overview, and it's useful in many respects to give you an idea of what you've got. But there's absolutely nothing can replace integrating the timetable information into that data. Because as you rightly say, if you've got smaller groups below 30, then you need more classrooms. It's a very simple scenario. And the number of times that you go into a school and you say you've got room for this number of pupils, and they turn around and say, no, I haven't. In fact, I need 4 more classrooms. That's a much more difficult argument if you've got the curriculum in front of you and say, well, look, that's where you're teaching maths, that's where you're teaching English, that's where you're teaching history. What are you going to teach in those rooms? What have you changed? And why do you need it?
I call it Boyle's Law for schools. School being the operational unit, and building being the container, and it will expand to fill the available space. And likewise, it will contract to fill the available space. And just as Boyle's Law states that the pressure increases as the volume decreases, it's the same with the school. As the buildings are smaller or the school grows within those buildings, the pressure increases, becomes harder to timetable, harder for operations, harder for everything within that school.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah. Okay, well, thanks for your time, Ian.
My pleasure.
Some really interesting conversations between Jeremy and Ian there. I hope that sort of brings to the fore why it's always good to hear these questions posed by someone who's working with the data, who is inevitably going to be impacted by an exercise of this nature and size. And as Ian alluded to, he has more than 50 academy schools, and in fact, he has schools in every tranche. So hearing about this through a head teacher is not the ideal place to find out about this programme. And we're glad that we were able to support him by answering some of the questions. Now, we have had a few questions put through the Q&A, and just to draw your attention to the fact that John has also been putting some links into the chat. So The first link is your tranche list link and your general overview information. So this is hearing firsthand from the DfE the aims of this programme. And you can check your tranche list and see where your schools are and when they're due to be visited. As far as we're aware, this early into the programme, that schedule is still going to plan. They do keep reiterating that it's early days, and I've no doubt there'll be a mop-up exercise at the end for schools that they haven't been able to arrange a visit with. The second link that you'll see in the chat that John's put on is the link to an email to contact the DfE directly. So if, for example, we've had a question put in the chat this afternoon that a secondary school has been missed for one of the trusts, so my advice would be email and ask why that is. So you've got that contact information as well. And I think, Jeremy, we should probably take some of the questions that have been posed on there, if that's okay with you. You're still muted, Jeremy.
Do you want me to click on answer live so they come up? Because I don't think the chat, everybody can see them behind.
Yeah.
So do them at the start. Okay.
Okie doke. Can you hear us okay, Jeremy?
Yes.
Fabulous. Okay. So one of the questions that's come up is, will they be working to BB 103? And also, will they be applying BB 104 for SRP provisions in our academies? Really good question.
Yep. Okay. So with regard to BB 103, the BB 103 has the associated schedule of accommodation spreadsheet, which uses the ADS codes, the area datasheet codes, to define the space uses. I am assured it will. I spoke with Beach Williamson back in June at an event on this. I asked him a specific question at a presentation, and he said, yes, it definitely will. At the moment, we've no way of knowing. We've only seen the rooms classified from the initial surveys. We've seen no output, and the spreadsheet hasn't been released. Therefore, I can't tell you how it will be presented, but I was assured Beach wrote both spreadsheets. Therefore, I'm assuming he'll tie the two together because he knows it better than anyone in the country. So I'm going to answer yes, I think he will. And I'm also going to answer, even if he doesn't, we can reverse engineer what they do have to match the ADS codes easily enough within the company anyway.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeremy. Another question that's come through is, I think similar to one of my academies is missing. They have scheduled one of my academies, which is currently being built under the school rebuilding programme. Should this be postponed or cancelled?
Good question. We've had this one for years. When we visit a site to do the capacity, it's a snapshot. It's a snapshot on that day. And I can give you an example. Many years ago, we arrived at a school to do a capacity process, and our rules are, if that space is weathertight and available for school use for 80% of the working week, then it is counted towards capacity. And this school, the day we arrived, they'd built a brand new school on the old playground, and it was the day of the week that they were switching over from one to the other. And all the pupils were in the old school, and they were moving them class by class across to the new school. So its capacity was double. And it's a snapshot. On that day, its capacity was double. But then you have to, so you have these hard and fast, it's a snapshot rules, and then you have to apply some local sense into that. And I would say, if it's the builders are on site and it's happening now, then they probably should be advised to cancel. But they just won't know. They've just got a list of schools that they've been told to do. And I would suggest, again, using the email address to inform them of what state it is, maybe with some photos, and let them make that decision for their snapshot at that moment in time.
Yeah, great. Thank you. A third question that's on there. Other than CAD and net capacity assessments, old net capacity assessment or current net capacity assessment data, we're certainly doing them every day. Is there anything else we should be providing to the VOA, such as SEND data or curriculum data?
I don't think so. I think with regard to the, I think it's because we haven't seen the final version of the net capacity spreadsheet for the special schools, and it's quite a difficult problem, because the nature of the provision for that current cohort can change the capacity. Physical need will reduce the capacity of a room. So once you get over a certain amount of physical need, you change the capacity of the room. I don't know how they're going to accommodate that in the spreadsheet, because it wasn't in the early beta that we have seen, and we haven't seen a new version for 12 months. But for 12 months, it has been 2 weeks away.
We are expecting to receive that spreadsheet.
Within 2 weeks.
Yeah, yeah. But fingers crossed. We've got to be hopeful.
I can't answer that question with regard to whether it should be in there somehow, but it could just be that they hang their hat on, this is the building capacity, the capacity of these rooms and this accommodation.
I think I would just add to that as well, Jeremy, if that's okay, just to say that, Jack asking the question, do you need to provide them anything other than CAD and all the NCA data? I would just make everything as much as you think is available. You understand pupil capacity, you know that it's not just a number calculation that's derived out from understanding what space you have and how many children you have. You understand the implications of curriculum. You understand the implication of the timetable. So I would, as far as possible, work with this process, give them everything that you think is going to make a difference when they do the calculation. And if they use it, fantastic. And if they don't, you know that we do. So yeah, get as much information as you can up front. I hope that's been useful, Jack. So, Jeremy, we also had a few questions submitted pre-session. And they're actually quite good because they cover 3 different flavours. So the critical question, I think, that everyone is going to want to know, what if my capacity is different to the one provided by the VOA?
Your capacity, if you are a school and a head teacher who has a capacity that they believe they're working to, you can have the political capacity of the school within your control by setting the planned admission number, which will throttle the net capacity to where you wish it to be. If it's different, it is another piece of information. We do this every day of the week. We work out capacities by several different methodologies to come to a consensus about what we think needs to happen in that school to change to a different number of pupils. So therefore, we have to get to a fixed number. And I think what I'm saying is this is just another piece of information. If you're negotiating for funds, capital funds to expand your school, this isn't the answer. This is another piece of information in the negotiation. And the guy with the best data and the most comprehensive data set usually wins in a negotiation. So get your own, get it to a good level, and use that in the negotiation if that's what you need this for. So I wouldn't be frightened by it being different. It's just another piece of information. If it's runs counter to everything you think and you are trying to achieve within the school, and pupil capacity is an important issue strategically for you, then come and get some really good data to challenge it.
And that's a really good lead in, Jeremy, actually, to the next question from Jack. If for trusts and schools who do want to challenge the data, what support can we provide? You touched on it very briefly in the video with Ian, and the window of opportunity for you to challenge is a small one. We obviously want to be able to mobilise in our support as swiftly and as quickly as possible. What might that look like?
I think that in terms of challenging it, it's a challenge. Yes, we've received the final output, which none of us have seen yet, and this is the number that is in there. We can challenge and say, look, we disagree because of this, this, and this, or it could just be that operationally the school runs differently to how the net capacity is assuming, and we see that quite often. That we run very small class sizes for the core subjects of maths and English. We want very small class sizes because that's important to us. And as a school, we've always functioned that way. That will mean that the way your school operates is very differently to the answer that the net capacity will give. So I would say if you wish to challenge it, you've got to have something to challenge it with and some other evidence, you've got to be able to poo-poo what's come from the Net Capacity Programme.
And we've supported several thousand schools across the country, Jeremy, with CAD capacity and more recently with BIM models. I think it's probably fair to say that if you have the comprehensive pupil capacity data from us, and your figure comes through and it's different and it is open to challenge, that's a far easier support for us to be able to give. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Fab. Okie doke. Some really good questions there from Jack. Thank you so much. This is about you, and it is about us having an understanding and creating a platform for you to ask these questions. So that's been really useful. Thank you. We only have a minute or two left. So I guess it would be really appropriate for Jeremy to just answer as best you can, Jeremy. They have alluded to possibly including colleges or FE provision in the programme at a later date. What do you feel the implications for colleges and universities of a programme of this nature could be?
Quite a tricky one. On one hand, definitely the bulge is heading that way, and the bulge has caused problems through primary, problems through secondary. We've spent nearly £20 billion accommodating that bulge in pupil numbers. The number trailing at the back end of the bulge is lower than it was at the front end of the bulge, so the system needs to be smaller going down the track. From a colleges and FE point of view, we need that data, but the next problem comes in the what data do you want? Net capacity will not help you on guided learning hours in a college, and therefore the calculation methodology is completely different, and it might be totally useless to have that data for some colleges that just don't operate in a timetabled way. That I think, as you'll be able to give me more detail on this, Pamela, it's the difference between pedagogy and andragogy.
Yes, there's definitely no time for that in this webinar.
Yeah.
But although I do feel a new webinar percolating on the back of that. So
Yes.
that's been really useful. Thank you, Jeremy. I hope everyone's enjoyed the webinar. It's our first foray into reaching out and bringing these questions to you. Any feedback that you have would be greatly welcomed. Hopefully everyone now has got a more rounded idea of what is the programme, what is it aiming to achieve, how does it impact me, and what do I need to have on hand to be ready for this programme taking place. So it's been wonderful hearing all your questions, and I hope you've enjoyed us reaching out to you. Unless there's anything else, Jeremy, that you wanted to cover.
No, I think we've closed off. So
fabulous. The links are there for your information. We're always at the end of the email, at the end of the telephone, happy to take any questions that you have. And yes, it's been great. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you, everyone.
That's great. And everything will be recorded and will be sent to you as a link. So that's coming shortly. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.